Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and today we have to talk about TikTok. And heads up, US TikTok users, we're talking about you because your data is actually being viewed and accessed in China. And if you're a longtime viewer or listener of my radio show, you can't say I haven't been telling you this for quite some time. Now, this is coming from BuzzFeed's Emily Baker White, and she had a great article on this. And so I'm either going to be quoting or paraphrasing her heavily, obviously, with my own thoughts interspersed here, because I got a ton of thoughts on this, as I have for many, many years. Now, according to leaked audio from more than 80 internal TikTok meetings, China-based employees of ByteDance have repeatedly accessed non-public data about US TikTok users, and this is exactly the type of behavior that we have basically been concerned about, to the point where former President Donald Trump even threatened to ban the app in the United States. At the time, I know for him it was more political as he's getting into a trade war in China, but I was a huge fan of that purely on the privacy standpoint. Now, these recordings were reviewed by BuzzFeed News. I have to imagine that Emily Baker White was one of those people that actually reviewed these things, but essentially, this contained 14 statements from 9 different TikTok employees indicating that engineers in China had access to US data at least between September of 2021 through January of 2022. That is the range of these statements, but I promise you, would put money on it, would bet the house on it, that they've had access from the beginning, and they still do. And we will talk about that in a minute here, given some of the statements that TikTok has said. Now, despite a TikTok's executive's sworn testimony in October of last year in a Senate hearing that a, quote, world-renowned US-based security team was actually the one who decides to get to access this data, 9 statements by 8 different employees in these recordings describe situations where US employees had to turn to their colleagues in China to determine how United States data, specifically user data, was flowing back and forth. The US staff did not have permission or knowledge of how to access the data on their own, and so therefore they were going to their superiors in China to figure that out. Quote, "Everything is seen in China," end quote, said a member of TikTok's Trust and Safety Department in a September 2021 meeting. In another September meeting, a director referred to one Beijing-based engineer as a quote-unquote master admin who, quote, has access to everything, end quote. Now, for the record, basically BuzzFeed interviewed a whole bunch, but due to their privacy and obviously non-disclosure agreements with TikTok, etc., they are not saying who these employees are. Hopefully one of these will come forward publicly as a whistleblower, a la Frances Haugen and Facebook. And quite frankly, Facebook is a whole other story, but man, TikTok, let's get going. Now, the recordings range from small group meetings with company leaders and consultants to basically all hands policy presentations that are corroborated by screenshots and other documents, providing a rather large amount of evidence to corroborate prior reports of China-based employees accessing US user data. Now, their content showed that this data was accessed far more frequently and recently than previously reported, painting basically a holistic picture of the challenges that basically the world's most popular social media app, at least it is right now, has faced in attempting to basically disentangle its US operations from those of its parent company in Beijing. I think, for the record, they're not really detangling. I think that's more publicly for show, but we'll get to that. Now, ultimately, these tapes suggest that the company has misled lawmakers, there you go, directly from the article, its users, and the public by downplaying that data stored in the United States could be accessed by employees in China. Literally, as they said before, one of their executives went on the record and basically said specifically that. Now, in response to the exhaustive list of examples and questions about data access, TikTok spokesperson Maureen Shanahan responded with a short statement, quote, "We know we're among the most scrutinized platforms from a security standpoint, and we aim to remove any doubt about the security of US data. That's why we hired experts in their field, continually work to validate our security standards, and bring in reputable independent third parties to test our defenses. Testing defenses doesn't tell me the back-end data replication, as essentially ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, could take all of that information from their infrastructure and move it from here to somewhere else. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Now, ByteDance did not provide any additional comments, nor, for the record, did that statement really address the actual internal meetings that were exposed by BuzzFeed, essentially saying that, hey, Chinese people, essentially in China, can access US customer data, when TikTok directly said under oath in a Senate hearing that they did not do that. Now, if you recall, in 2019, on top of this, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. began investigating the national security implications of TikTok's collection of American data. This is something I've been talking about for years. Now, also in 2020, then President Donald Trump threatened to ban the app entirely over concerns that the Chinese government could use ByteDance to amass dossiers of personal information about US TikTok users. I had been saying that for years before 2020 as well. That 12-year-old kid that does the horrendously stupid stuff on TikTok 20 years later decides to run for Congress, and guess who has pictures and copies of those videos even if he or she deleted them? That's right, the Chinese government. Goes back to a 2017 Chinese law that basically says if you have information on foreigners, meaning non-Chinese citizens, aka US citizens, the Chinese government is required to have access. Now, TikTok's, quote, data collection threatens to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information, end quote. That was according to the executive order written by then President Trump. Now, TikTok said that it has never shared data with Chinese government and would not do so if asked. That is an absolute 100% lie under Chinese law. That is a lie. They would be put out of business by the Chinese government, and we have seen multiple examples of that when companies or individuals attempt to buck the Chinese government. They get taxed into oblivion, they get taken off their own internal Chinese social media, all these kinds of things, from influencers to corporations. I've talked about that at length. That is an absolute lie, and there's overwhelming evidence to show otherwise. Now, most of the recorded meetings focus on TikTok's response to these concerns. The company is currently attempting to redirect basically its quote-unquote pipes so that certain protected data can no longer flow out of the United States and into China. This is an effort internally that they are calling, for some reason, Project Texas, as in maybe you don't mess with it. Now, in these recordings, the vast majority of situations were Chinese-based staff accessing US user data, and basically this was in service of Project Texas's aim to halt this data access. So in other words, they're trying to basically have this project that says, okay, we shouldn't have Chinese-based employees or the government access US-based data for this thing we're calling Project Texas, so let's have Chinese people go ahead and access this just to prove it or test it or, whatever it is. Come on. Now, Project Texas is key basically to a contract that TikTok is currently negotiating with cloud service provider Oracle as well as Cepheus. Now, under the Cepheus agreement, TikTok would hold US users' protected private information like phone numbers, birth dates, exclusively at a data center managed by Oracle in Texas. Okay, there you go for the project name, although I still think the don't mess with is part of that. Now, this data would be accessible by specific US-based TikTok employees. What data counts as quote-unquote protected is still being negotiated, but the recordings indicate that all public data, including users' public profiles and everything they post, will not be included. There you go. Oracle did not respond to a request. Cepheus declined to comment as well. Now, shortly before the publication of this story, TikTok published a blog post announcing that it had changed, quote, the default storage location of user data, and that today, quote, 100% of user traffic is being routed to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Now, we still use our US and Singapore data centers for backup, but as we continue our work, we expect to delete users' private data from our own data centers and fully pivot to Oracle servers located in the US. Where are those backups going? Where else are those backups going, I should say? So for example, let's say you have a public-facing app. I open it up on my phone. I'm storing that data in Oracle's cloud or AWS or Azure. Take your pick, IBM, Google, you name it. What I will never see, nor will I be able to detect, is on the back end if that data is then replicated somewhere else. They're claiming it goes to the United States and Singapore, and that's all well and good. But what about Chinese interests? ByteDance is out of Beijing. This is a huge problem, which means while, let's say, in the United States, it looks all copacetic for their engineers, they don't necessarily know what's happening when that data is replicated to Singapore. And Singapore is obviously not in China. They've got really good data privacy laws. But again, Chinese corporation under a 2017 communist Chinese law basically says they require access, or essentially you can't operate as a business in China. That is a huge thing. Now, TikTok has said in blog posts and public statements that it physically stores all data about its users in the United States with backups in Singapore. And according to BuzzFeed, and I quote, "This does mitigate some risks. The company says this data is not subject to Chinese law, but it does not address the fact that Chinese-based employees can access the data." That is partially true. I partially disagree with, I can't remember her name, Ms. Emily Baker White. Anyway, the BuzzFeed author, which I think was a great article. There's a lot more that she goes into. I encourage all of you to read it. But here's the thing. I can access information from anywhere. I can literally spin up a server in Singapore and gain remote access from here in Chicago in the United States. And nobody's really going to know. Nobody's really going to understand that. Or I can even route my connections. If I don't want people to know I'm in the United States, I can route them through Japan or India or somewhere else in the region to make it look like, okay, somebody from India is actually accessing a data center in Singapore. They don't necessarily have to have a direct Chinese connection. But again, I go back to the standards and practices of the Chinese government since 2017, when they enacted that law that basically said, if you are an organization or a corporation in China, we're going to let you do business, but we are required to have access to the data that you are collecting on foreigners. China is the world's largest surveillance state. This is a huge issue. This does not skirt it. TikTok has not answered for that. This is something that I've talked about in the past. I have done multiple videos and writings and everything else on just the horrendousness of TikTok's privacy above and beyond the Chinese government, not to mention a cybersecurity expert basically reverse engineering TikTok's app to see how it was evading defenses, how it was attempting to scan networks when it was on wireless, capture more information outside of the TikTok ecosystem on the device and across the network, and basically send just a whole bunch of really interesting, unusual, and terrifying information off of the phone to God knows where. A US-based data center that's replicated to Singapore that God knows who has access to. There's no transparency here. And while I'm not expecting them to publish, oh yes, these are our logins, our IP addresses, our backend, accessibility, I have yet to see any third-party independent reports that proves that. I have yet to see any traffic analyzers essentially being put on anywhere that this data is going. And that's obviously going to be a huge problem. And Oracle, while they're not going to respond, and I'm surprised they're using Oracle, but okay, they are replicating this information out to Singapore, which means from Singapore, it could be replicated anywhere else. Now you're outside of that data center. Who owns that? There's so many different questions here. And again, understand the laws that TikTok falls under are Chinese-based laws. Secondarily, whatever other country they're operating in, which means as they're replicating this data out, it becomes a huge problem. You can't say you haven't been told. Not to mention the fact that social media in general is just bad for kids, and kids are all over TikTok. Whether it's the depression and suicide rates, I've talked about that, tremendously. Go read iGen by Jean Twenge or The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I mean, these are basically books that you can read on this entire subject, but this is a privacy nightmare, and it's not getting any better. And BuzzFeed just proved it. So thank you, BuzzFeed. Thank you, Emily Baker White, I believe your name was, and I'm sorry I forgot it already. But this is something that drives me up a wall. We need to address this. And quite frankly, I kind of wish Trump did get this banned. Life would be a whole lot more private. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Oh, and one more thing, because I'm inevitably going to get this now that I just thought of this, is I'm always going to get the, well, what about Facebook? Data mining the hell out of you. What about Twitter? Data mining the hell out of you. Sure, absolutely. But we have recourse under U.S. law for U.S.-based companies in the same way that we have recourse under European Union law if it's a company based out of Germany or wherever it is. We don't have that ability with China. Understand the difference. Understand that while we can have the FTC or the SEC come down and find the bejesus out of the Facebooks of the world and do that for the American side of TikTok, at the end of the day, TikTok is beholden to a foreign government where we have no legal recourse under their law. So make sure that you are remembering that. And now, please attempt to stay private. Take care.